Hi everyone, my name is Kelsey Crow, and today I'm going to be presenting to you some information on supporting second language acquisition. The objective and goal of my research project today is to identify best strategies for second language acquisition within a classroom. For years, there has been an ongoing debate between different teaching models and strategies of second language instruction, specifically on the usage of L1, using a student's native language to teach a student a second language. Within this project, I want to share with you some information around these instructional strategies in deciding which ones are best to support our students. Within this presentation, we're going to begin by defining language acquisition, discuss some of the research and theory of language acquisition, describe how this research is put into practice specifically within a classroom, discuss the other side of the debate that actually favors using L1 in teaching L2, and lastly, revert back to my objective on identifying best practices to support language acquisition within a classroom. So to begin, I want to define language acquisition. According to Krashen, Stephen Krashen believes that language acquisition is the process of learning and acquiring language through the subconscious picking up of a language by focusing on meaning rather than form. With language acquisition, Krashen believes that there are 5 steps or predictable stages of second language acquisition and how this process unfolds. These 5 stages are pre-production, early production, speech emergence, intermediate fluency, and advanced fluency. Along with language acquisition and these 5 stages, there are many theorists that have different perspectives on how language is acquired in general. For example, we have some theorists who believe that language is similar to behaviorism. It needs to be practiced and repeated in order for us to acquire it. And there's other theorists who believe that we possess an innate ability to acquire language naturally and learn language through exposure and interaction. There's a few other theories that are quite similar in their ideas, in that we learn and acquire language in our own individual way, and that learning is a little bit contingent on our social needs, such as motivation, interest, and a positive environment. So overall, we can already see how some of these theories on acquisition can influence how a teacher might choose to introduce specific topics and design her classroom content. Looking a little bit further into second language acquisition research, Krashen has a theory of language acquisition broken down into 5 categories or hypotheses. Each of these hypotheses are very dense and complex, and while they're all very critical to language acquisition, for the purpose of my research, I'm choosing to delineate only one, and that is the affective filter. So the affective filter can sometimes be considered a student's frustration, confusion, or anxiety. And of course, this can positively or negatively influence a student's learning and acquisition within a classroom. This is something essential for teachers to be aware of when designing content and instruction, because of course there are certain activities that can trigger this anxiety or frustration, and actually some of these activities can be more detrimental for a learner's acquisition than beneficial. So something to definitely keep in mind. Now, looking a little bit further, how this research reflects into our practice, how everything we just looked at is implemented into a second language classroom. According to these theories, an ideal language class should be designed to rely fully on comprehensible input and rely fully on the use of the target language, provide input from the classroom teacher and meaningful opportunities for output, give students the opportunity to analyze language so that grammar is implicitly taught rather than explicitly, and provide students with communicative tasks that mimic an authentic environment to maximize language exposure. So you might be thinking to yourself, first of all, how does this look inside a classroom? And secondly, what do some of these terms mean? Well, nonetheless, before we proceed, I want to make sure that I define some of these terms in order so we can understand a little bit better. So the first term we looked at was the idea of comprehensible input. Comprehensible input can be described as using the target language completely, but implementing photos, cognates, TPR, and gestures to help students negotiate meaning and aid their comprehension and to figure out what is being said. The idea of input and output refers to the amount of target language students are receiving. This can be done from a teacher authentic video or reading task. Output, of course, refers to what the students produce in the target language, such as speaking, writing, etc. The idea of implicit and explicit grammar teaching are two ideas that are quite opposite. Implicit teaching refers to students analyzing language and trying to figure out grammatical patterns and rules based on analyzing a poem or a reading or a song. Typically, this is a little bit more enticing for students. It gives them an quote unquote aha moment. And pace lessons are something that really encompass the idea of implicit grammar teaching. Explicit grammar teaching, on the contrary, is the idea of using a student's native language to explain the rules and grammatical features in the student's about the student's target language. So explicitly and thoroughly explaining grammar rules would be the idea of explicit grammar teaching. And lastly, one thing I want to touch upon too is grammar corrections. This is yet another debatable topic. Grammar corrections are the idea of recast versus explicit grammar correction. A recast would be, for example, if a student says something incorrect, you would rephrase what he said correctly, of course, hoping that the student can internalize what you said and realize the grammar mistake and be able to correct it with kind of like a gentle reminder. Whereas explicit grammar corrections are more specifically saying, this is wrong, this is why it's wrong, please fix it. So you may be wondering how all of this looks inside a classroom, and I'm going to share with you a little bit about how this would look inside my friend's classroom. So for example, one of the units we do focuses on clothing. To introduce my clothing, I would use comprehensible input. So I'd have a slideshow of people wearing specific outfits. I would explain what they're wearing in French, of course, by like pointing to the picture or even kind of pointing to what I'm wearing. I might use vocabulary from a previous unit, such as I wear a coat when it's cold out, I wear a dress when it's hot. Instead of giving them the direct translations, I would have pictures on the slideshow and maybe act out what I'm saying so that they're able to understand what I'm saying entirely using the target language versus me explaining in English what I'm saying. And I would never directly tell the students what the sentence mean because the pictures kind of works as context clues to aid their comprehension. So overall, everything we've talked about thus far supports Krashen's ideas of language acquisition and how students should be acquiring language seamlessly with the use of comprehensible input, target language, opportunities for both input and output, and hopefully the idea of implicit grammar teaching. Now, however, we're going to be considering a shift in language teaching or a different side to this debate. So for me, before I began studying ESL and bilingual education, I was only aware of these core principles that I just talked about with Krashen, comprehensible input, implicit grammar teaching, and pretty much total elimination of a student's first language. However, when I began my studies in ESL, I quickly noticed there was a much larger emphasis on the bilingual education approach, specifically within ESL programs and their design. I mean, of course, these programs still encompass strategies like comprehensible input, but they value the use of a student's language and believe a student's native language can be a great asset in ameliorating a student's second language learning and trajectory. So this has been quite a debate among researchers for quite some time, and now we're going to look at the other side of that language acquisition, um, using a student's first language to kind of better their second one.